In 1918, famous American political commentator H.L. Mencken wrote, quote, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety, by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary." The end of the Cold War in 1990 presented a serious problem for the American empire. The threat of communism could no longer justify massive wartime military budgets and a worldwide system of military bases. It could no longer justify American military intervention to protect corporate interests whenever a nation's political establishment threatened change. The easy profits from military contracts decreased as peace spread throughout the world. The solution was an extensive propaganda campaign to replace the threat of communism with the threat of terrorism. In the interim, a conventional war was created. America's ally Iraq was encouraged to invade Kuwait, but then demonized and attacked to justify a short war and new American military bases in the region. This 1991 Gulf War is celebrated in our media, even though it was a disaster. See the short documentary link below for details. This war allowed the establishment of American military bases in Saudi Arabia that angered many wealthy Saudi religious fundamentalists. They funded groups of nationalists to conduct violent attacks against American political targets in the region. Many had been trained and armed by the American CIA in the 1980s to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, and were sent to Kosovo by the CIA in the early 1990s to attack Serbians. The CIA referred to their proxy fighters as Al-Qaeda, which is short for database in Arabic, since they were listed in a CIA computer database of Arab nationalists who violently oppose Western encroachment of the Muslim world. Osama Bin Laden was never the leader of Al-Qaeda, since it was never a real organization, although he did lead 100 Arab nationalists who lived in Afghanistan. He had nothing to do with the famous September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States, and learned about it from the media. Osama bin Laden was wanted by the FBI before and after the 9/11 attacks, only in connection to 2 embassy attacks in Africa. The American government blamed a Kuwaiti for the 9/11 attacks, Khalid, Shaikh Mohammad, pictured here, and a dozen Saudis who were said to have died in airplanes. These persons had never been to Afghanistan and were said to have planned and trained for the attacks in the Philippines, Germany, and the United States. Yet the United States invaded Afghanistan after the Bush administration suggested that Osama bin Laden was responsible. Once the war on terror was underway in remote Afghanistan, victory seemed at hand as Osama bin Laden was located in the Tora Bora mountains. His only possible escape route was to Pakistan through rugged mountain passes. The CIA officer in charge of finding him, Gary Bernstein, asked that the 800 U.S. Army Rangers assigned to support his mission be airlifted to block these escape routes. Bernstein wrote a book about this operation, Jawbreaker, where he complained that permission to trap bin Laden was denied by the White House, and bin Laden escaped. Killing or capturing bin Laden at Tora Bora would have quickly won the war on terror in the minds of Americans, but he was just a ruse. The Bush administration planned to use the myth of a worldwide Al-Qaeda threat as an excuse to invade other nations. President Bush stunned reporters at a March 13, 2002 White House news conference when he explained that a long global war was underway and Osama bin Laden was no longer important.
Mr. President, in your speeches now, you rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden. Why is that? Also, can you tell the American people if you have any more information, if you know if he is dead or alive? Final part here. Deep in your heart, don't you truly believe that until you find out if he is dead or alive, you won't really eliminate the threat of...
Well, deep in my heart, I know the man's on the run if he's alive at all. And who knows if he's hiding in some cave or not. We hadn't heard from him in a long time. And the idea of focusing on one person is really indicates to me people don't understand the scope of the mission. Terror is bigger than one person. And he's a person who's now been marginalized.
The American media ignored President Bush's revealing statements, and Osama bin Laden remained the new Hitler in American society. A massive propaganda campaign convinced world leaders to support American military operations around the world to destroy al-Qaeda. This was used to generate public support in the United States for massive increases in military spending and worldwide imperial adventures. War plans were leaked to a former American four-star general, Wesley Clark. Several years later, on a PBS News show, he revealed that he visited the Pentagon a few days after 9/11. A general who once worked for him was upset and told him, quote, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off, Iran." See the link below for the full account. This sounded like a wild conspiracy theory in 2007, based on the Israeli Yinon Plan to shatter Arab nations, and related plans by the neocon Project for the New American Century for conquest of the Arab world. But this memo proved accurate over the next decade. Iraq was conquered, but this was far more complicated than envisioned. President Obama continued the secret plan as Somalia and Sudan were quietly conquered using CIA proxy forces. Libya was destroyed using both conventional and CIA proxy forces. Syria was almost destroyed in this manner, but the Russians intervened, which delayed plans for Lebanon and Iran. All these wars were justified to fight the mythical Qaeda, which appears anywhere the American empire wants to intervene. It shows up all over the Middle East, but also in Africa, Indonesia, the Philippines, and even Venezuela. Experienced exile reporter Eric Margolis mocked the al-Qaeda ghost in 2014 when he wrote, quote, "How can al-Qaeda be all over the Middle East, North Africa, and now much of Black Africa? This after the U.S. spent over $1 trillion trying to stamp out al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The answer is simple. As an organization and threat, al-Qaeda barely exists. But as a name, al-Qaeda and, quote, terrorism have become the West's handy universal term for armed groups fighting Western influence, corruption, or repression in Asia and Africa. Al-Qaeda is nowhere but everywhere," end quote. This is why al-Qaeda is an ideal foe for a military-industrial complex. Since it doesn't exist, it can never be destroyed. Its leaders are chosen by the CIA that runs al-Qaeda websites where they announce threats. Constant American aerial bombing ensures there are thousands of victims each year whose families fight back against this foreign onslaught, thus providing more targets for daily bombings. American political assassinations worldwide occur weekly that kill 9 times more innocents nearby, thus creating more terrorists from vengeful relatives. This is mostly done by drones and a blatantly illegal campaign that began under President Bush, and these murders accelerated under Presidents Obama and Trump. The war on terror is a replacement for the Cold War to justify worldwide domination by the American empire. The communist threat has been replaced by the terrorist threat. This allows wartime military budgets for endless, low-intensity wars, whose purpose was described in 1986 by retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Fletcher Prouty. We must understand that it has become the objective of low-intensity conflict to continue the wasting of money, the pointless killing of defenseless people, and the consumption or attrition of costly war material to make way for the procurement of more. Low-intensity conflict is a way in which the hundreds of billions of dollars in armaments produced each year can be used, destroyed, and wasted this year in order that more may be procured and used next year.